Take up any one of our ordinary newspapers and you will find a part devoted to the theatre and music. In almost every number you will find a description of some art exhibition or of some particular picture, and you will always find reviews of new works of art that have appeared, of volumes of poems, of short stories, or of novels. Promptly and in detail, as soon as it has occurred, an account is published of how such and such an actress or actor played this or that role in such and such a drama, comedy, or opera, and of the merits of the performance, as well as of the contents of the new drama, comedy, or opera, with its defects and merits. With as much care and detail, or even more, we are told how such and such an artist has sung a certain piece, or has played it on the piano or violin, and what were the merits and defects of the piece and of the performance. In every large town there is sure to be at least one, if not more than one, exhibition of new pictures, the merits and defects of which are discussed in the utmost detail by critics and connoisseurs. New novels and poems in separate volumes or in the magazines appear almost every day, and the newspapers consider it their duty to give their readers detailed accounts of these artistic productions. For the support of art in Russia, where for the education of the people only 100th part is spent on what would be required to give every one the opportunity of instruction, the government grants millions of rubles in subsidies to academies, conservatories and theatres. In France, 20 million lion francs are assigned for art, and similar grants are made in Germany and England. In every large town, enormous buildings are erected for museums, academies, conservatories, dramatic schools, and for performances and concerts. Hundreds of thousands of workmen, carpenters, masons, painters, joiners, paper hangers, tailors, hairdressers, jewellers, moulders, typesetters spend their whole lives in hard labour to satisfy the demands of art, so that hardly any other department of human activity, except the military, consumes so much energy as this. Not only is enormous labour spent on this activity, but in, as in war, the very lives of men are sacrificed. Hundreds of thousands of people devote their lives from childhood to learning to twirl their legs rapidly, dancers, or to touch notes and strings very rapidly, musicians, or to draw with paint and represent what they see, artists, or to turn every phrase inside out and find a rhyme to every word. And these people, often very kind and clever and capable of all sorts of useful labour, grow savage over their specialized and stupefying occupations, and become one-sided and self-complacent specialists, dull to all the serious phenomena of life, and skillful only at rapidly twisting their legs, their tongues, or their fingers. But even this stunting of human life is not the worst. I remember being once at the rehearsal of one of the most ordinary of the new operas which are produced at all the opera houses of Europe and America. I arrived when the first act had already begun. To reach the auditorium I had to pass through the stage entrance. By dark entrances and passages I was led through the vaults of an enormous building, past immense machines for changing the scenery and for lighting, and there in the gloom and dust I saw workmen busily engaged. One of these men, pale, haggard, in a dirty blouse, with dirty, work-worn hands and cramped fingers, evidently tired and out of humour, went past me, angrily scolding another man. Ascending by a dark stair, I came out on the boards behind the scenes. Amid various poles and rings and scattered scenery, decorations and curtains stood and moved dozens, if not hundreds, of painted and dressed-up men, in costumes fitting tight to their thighs and calves, and also women, as usual, as nearly nude as might be. These were all singers, or members of the chorus, or ballet dancers, waiting their turns. My guide led me across the stage, and by means of a bridge of boards across the orchestra, in which perhaps 100 musicians of all kinds, from kettle drum to flute and harp, were seated, to the dark pit stalls. On an elevation between two lamps with reflectors and in an armchair placed before a music stand sat the director of the musical part, baron in hand, managing the orchestra and singers and in general the production of the whole opera. The performance had already begun, and on the stage a procession of Indians who had brought home a bride was being presented. Besides men and women in costume, 2 other men in ordinary clothes bustled and ran about on the stage. One was the director of the dramatic part, and the other, who stepped about in soft shoes and ran from place to place with unusual agility, was the dancing master, whose salary per month exceeded what 10 labourers earn in a year. These 3 directors arranged the singing, the orchestra, and the procession. The procession, as usual, was enacted by couples with tin-foil halberds on their shoulders. They all came from one place and walked round and round again, and then stopped. The procession took a long time to arrange. First, the Indians with halberds came on too late, then too soon, then at the right time, but crowded together at the exit. Then they did not crowd, but arranged themselves badly at the sides of the stage, and each time the whole performance was stopped and started again from the beginning. The procession was introduced by a recitative delivered by a man dressed up like some variety of Turk, who, opening his mouth in a curious way, sang, "Home I bring the bride." He sings and waves his arm, which is of course bare, from under his mantle. The procession begins, but here the French horn, in the accompaniment of the recitative, does something wrong, and the director, with a shudder as if some catastrophe had occurred, raps with his stick on the stand. All is stopped, and the director, turning to the orchestra, attacks the French horn, scolding him in the rudest terms, as cabmen abuse each other for taking the wrong note. And again the whole thing begins again. The Indians with the halberds again come on, treading softly in their extraordinary boots. Again the singer sings, "Home I bring the bride." But here the pairs get too close together. More raps with the stick, more scolding, and a recommencement. Again, "Home I bring the bride." Again the same gesticulation with the bare arm from under the mantle, and again the couples, treading softly with halberds on their shoulders, some with sad and serious faces, some talking and smiling, arrange themselves in a circle and begin to sing. All seems to be going well, but again the stick raps, and the director, in a distressed and angry voice, begins to scold the men and women of the chorus. It appears that when singing they had omitted to raise their hands from time to time in sign of animation. Are you all dead, or what? Cows that you are! Are you corpses, that you can't move? Again they start, "Home I bring the bride." And again, with sorrowful faces, the chorus women sing, first one and then another of them raising their hands. But 2 chorus girls speak to each other, again a more vehement rapping with the stick. "Have you come here to talk? Can't you gossip at home? You there, in red breeches, come nearer. Look toward me. Begin again. Home I bring the bride." And so it goes on for 1, 2, 3 hours. The whole of such a rehearsal lasts 6 hours on end. Raps with the stick, repetitions, placings, corrections of the singers, of the orchestra, of the procession of the dancers, all seasoned with angry scolding. I heard the words asses, fools, idiots, swine, addressed to the musicians and singers at least 40 times in the course of 1 hour. And the unhappy individual to whom the abuse is addressed, flutist, hornblower, or singer, physically and mentally demoralized, does not reply and does what is demanded of him. 20 times is repeated the one phrase, home I bring the bride. And 20 times the striding about in yellow shoes with a halberd over their shoulder. The conductor knows that these people are so demoralized that they are no longer fit for anything but to blow trumpets and walk about with halberds and in yellow shoes, and that they are also accustomed to dainty, easy living, so that they will put up with anything rather than lose their luxurious life. He therefore gives free vent to his churlishness, especially as he has seen the same thing done in Paris and Vienna, and knows that this is the way the best conductors behave, and that it is a musical tradition of great artists to be carried away by the great business of their art, that they cannot pause to consider the feelings of other artists. It would be difficult to find a more repulsive sight. I have seen one workman abuse another for not supporting the weight piled upon him when goods were being unloaded, or at haystacking, the village elder scold a peasant for not making the rick right, and the man submitted in silence. And, however unpleasant it was to witness the scene, the unpleasantness was lessened by the consciousness that the business in hand was needful and important, and that the fault for which the headman scolded the labourer was one which might spoil a needful undertaking. But what was being done here? For what and for whom? Very likely the conductor was tired out, like the workmen I passed in the vaults. It was even evident that he was. But who made him tire himself? And for what was he tiring himself? The opera he was rehearsing was one of the most ordinary of operas for people who are accustomed to them, but also one of the most gigantic absurdities that could possibly be devised. An Indian king wants to marry. They bring him a bride. He disguises himself as a minstrel. The bride falls in love with the minstrel and is in despair, but afterwards discovers that the minstrel is the king, and everyone is highly delighted. That there never were, or could be, such Indians, and that they were not only unlike Indians, but that what they were doing was unlike anything on earth except other operas, was beyond all manner of doubt. That people do not converse in such a way as recitative, and do not place themselves at fixed distances in a quartet, waving their arms to express their emotions, that nowhere, except in theatres, do people walk about in such a manner, in pairs, with tin-foil halberds and in slippers, that no one ever gets angry in such a way, or is affected in such a way, or laughs in such a way, or cries in such a way, and that no one on earth can be moved by such performances. All this is beyond the possibility of doubt. Instinctively the question presents itself, for whom is this being done? Whom can it please? If there are occasionally great melodies in the opera to which it is pleasant to listen, they could have been sung simply, without these stupid costumes, and all the processions and recitatives and hand-wavings. The ballet, in which half-naked women make voluptuous movements, twisting themselves into various sensual wreathings, is simply a lewd performance. So one is quite at loss as to whom these things are done for. The man of culture is hardly sick of them, while to a real working man they are utterly incomprehensible. If anyone can be pleased by these things, which is doubtful, it can only be some young footman or depraved artisan who has contracted the spirit of the upper classes, but is not yet satiated with their amusements, and wishes to show his breeding. And all this nasty folly is prepared, not simply nor with kindly merriment, but with anger and brutal cruelty. It is said that it is all done for the sake of art, and that art is a very important thing. But is it true that art is so important that such sacrifices should be made for its sake? This question is especially urgent because art, for the sake of which the labour of millions, the lives of men, and above all love between man and man are being sacrificed, this very art is becoming something more and more vague and uncertain to human perception. Criticism, in which the lovers of art used to find support for their opinions, has latterly become so self-contradictory that if we exclude from the domain of art all that to which the critics of various schools themselves deny the title, there is scarcely any art left. The artists of various sects, like the theologians of the various sects, mutually exclude and destroy themselves. Listen to artists of the schools of our times, and you will find in all branches each set of artists disowning others. In poetry, the old romanticists deny the Parnasians and the decadents. The Parnasians disown the romanticists and the decadents. The decadents disown all their predecessors and the symbolists. The symbolists disown all their predecessors, and les mages disown all their predecessors. Among novelists, we have naturalists, psychologists, and naturists, all rejecting each other, and it is the same in dramatic art, in painting, and in music. So art, which demands such tremendous labour, sacrifices from the people, which stunts human lives and transgresses against human love, is not only not a thing clearly and firmly defined, but is understood in such contradictory ways by its own devotees that it is difficult to say what is meant by art, and especially what is good, useful art. Art for the sake of which we might condone such sacrifices as are being offered at its shrine.